Tupac was walking down a quiet Oakland street when he heard something that stopped him dead in his tracks. Someone was singing Dear Mama with more soul than he'd ever heard before. But when he found the source of that incredible voice, what he discovered would haunt him for the rest of his life. It was a crisp November morning in 1995, and Tupac Shakur was taking one of his rare solo walks through East Oakland. No bodyguards, no entourage, just him in a simple black hoodie and faded jeans, trying to clear his head and reconnect with the streets that had shaped him. But what nobody walking past realized was that Tupac was struggling deeply. The pressures of fame, legal battles, and constant media scrutiny were crushing him. Most painfully, he felt like he was losing touch with the very communities his music was supposed to represent. The night before, he'd sat staring at a blank piece of paper, trying to write new lyrics, but nothing came. For the first time since he'd started making music, he felt disconnected from his purpose. This morning walk was supposed to be therapy, a way to reconnect with his roots. He'd chosen this route through Oakland's authentic neighborhoods where real people lived real struggles, where his music actually meant something beyond chart positions. As he walked past small houses and saw kids playing, mothers watching their children, old men playing dominoes, Tupac remembered his own childhood in these types of neighborhoods. The uncertainty, the struggles, the way his mother held him and promised things would be different. Those memories had inspired Dear Mama, but now, walking as a wealthy celebrity rather than a struggling kid, he wondered if he still had the right to speak for people whose daily reality he no longer shared. That's when he heard it. At first, just a distant melody floating on the morning air. But something about the voice made Tupac stop and listen. It was singing Dear Mama, but not like he'd ever heard it before. This wasn't someone playing his record. This was a live voice, raw and unpolished, singing his words with a depth of emotion that gave him chills. Whoever was singing knew every word and was putting their entire soul into the performance. The voice carried fresh, real pain. This was someone who had lived every word, who understood the complex mix of love and resentment that defines so many mother-son relationships and struggle. Tupac found himself drawn toward the voice like a magnet. As he got closer, he could hear guitar accompaniment, sophisticated jazz-influenced playing that elevated his simple rap into something that felt almost like a prayer. But when he turned the corner onto MLK Boulevard, what he saw stopped his heart. The contradiction between what he was hearing and seeing was so stark he thought he was hallucinating. As Tupac turned the corner onto MLK Boulevard, he saw the source of that incredible voice, and his heart nearly stopped. Sitting on the sidewalk outside a closed storefront, surrounded by a small crowd of about 15 people, was a black man who appeared to be in his 50s. His clothes were worn and patched, a faded brown jacket that had seen better years, jeans with holes in the knees, and shoes that were falling apart. His graying hair was unkempt, and his beard was scraggly and untrimmed. Everything about his appearance screamed homelessness and hardship, but in his weathered hands was a beautiful acoustic guitar, a Martin D-28 that looked like it had been well-loved for decades. Despite its owner's circumstances, the instrument was clean and carefully maintained, its wood gleaming in the morning sun. And from this homeless man's mouth was flowing the most beautiful, most emotionally powerful version of Dear Mama that Tupac had ever heard. The man's eyes were closed as he sang, completely lost in the music, pouring every ounce of pain and love and lived experience into Tupac's lyrics. But what struck Tupac most profoundly was how the man was adapting the song, making it his own while respecting its original meaning. When I was young me and my mama had beef. Now I'm 53 and living on the street. But I appreciate how you raised me and all the extra love you gave me. Mama, I love you. Place no one above you. The small crowd was completely mesmerized. These weren't tourists or passers-by. These were neighborhood people, many of whom looked like they were struggling themselves. But they weren't just dropping change out of pity. They were genuinely moved by what they were witnessing. Some had tears streaming down their faces. Others were singing along softly, their voices blending with the musicians in a spontaneous choir of shared experience. There was an elderly woman in a house dress who kept wiping her eyes with a tissue. A young mother holding a baby was swaying gently to the music, her child calm and attentive in her arms. Two teenage boys who probably should have been in school stood transfixed, their usual street-hardened expressions softened by the vulnerability of the performance. This wasn't just street performing. This was ministry. This was therapy. This was community healing happening in real time. Tupac stood frozen about 20 feet away, hidden behind a parked car, watching this homeless man transform his personal tribute to his mother into something universal, something that spoke to every person who had ever loved imperfectly or been loved imperfectly in return. The way Professor Bob, though Tupac didn't know his name yet, sang certain lines hit Tupac like physical blows. And even as a crack fiend, Mama, you always was a black queen. Mama, there was such forgiveness in his voice. Such understanding of human frailty and the complexity of love that exists even in dysfunction. Tupac realized he was witnessing someone who had lived through even deeper pain than what he'd written about. Someone who had found a way to transform that pain into grace. When the song ended, the small crowd erupted in genuine applause. Not the polite clapping you might give a street performer, but the kind of enthusiastic appreciation you'd show a professional artist who had just moved you to tears. "Thank you, Professor Bob," called out the elderly woman. "That was beautiful, as always. Play Keep Your Head Up next," shouted one of the teenagers. "That one helps me when I'm feeling down." Professor Bob smiled, a radiant smile that transformed his weathered face completely. "You know I got you, young brother. This next one, S for everyone here who S fighting to keep going when the world S trying to knock you down." As he began the opening chords of Keep Ya Head Up, Tupac felt something stirring in his chest that he hadn't felt in months, the recognition of his music's true purpose. He wasn't just watching someone cover his songs. He was watching someone use his art as a tool for community building, for healing, for reminding people of their own strength and dignity. Professor Bob's arrangement of Keep Ya Head Up was even more transformative than his version of Dare Mama. He'd slowed it down, turned it into a gospel-influenced anthem that invited participation rather than passive listening. Soon, the entire crowd was singing along. Keep your head up. Ooh, child, things are going to get easier. Keep your head up. Ooh, child, things will get brighter. Tupac watched as complete strangers put their arms around each other's shoulders, as the teenage boys sang harmony with the elderly woman, as the young mother lifted her baby higher so the child could see Professor Bob face sang. This was everything Tupac had hoped his music could accomplish, but had never seen demonstrated so clearly. His songs weren't just entertainment. They were tools that could bring people together, help them process trauma, remind them of their shared humanity. But what happened next would change everything about how Tupac understood his own role as an artist. Tupac knew he had to approach the musician, but he was nervous about disrupting what was clearly a sacred moment. He waited until Professor Bob finished Keep Ya Head Up, and the crowd started to disperse, some dropping bills into the guitar case, others stopping to shake the man's hand or offer words of encouragement. As the last of the audience members walked away, Tupac slowly approached, his heart pounding with nervousness he hadn't felt since his first recording session. "Excuse me," Tupac said quietly, pulling his hood down so the man could see his face. "I heard you singing from several blocks away. That was incredible, man." Professor Bob looked up from tuning his guitar, and for a moment, his eyes widened with what looked like recognition. Then he rubbed his eyes, blinked hard, looked again, and seemed to convince himself he was seeing things. "Thank you, young brother," Professor Bob said with a voice that was warm but carried the weight of hard living. His speaking voice was educated, articulate, not what Tupac had expected from someone living on the streets. "Music helps me remember that I'm still human, you know? Still have something valuable to offer the world." Tupac crouched down to be at eye level with the musician, studying his face. Up close, he could see intelligence and kindness in the man's eyes, along with a depth of pain that spoke of profound losses. This was in someone who had fallen through the cracks due to addiction or mental illness. This was someone whose life had been derailed by circumstances beyond their control. "What's your name?" Tupac asked. "Robert Washington. But folks around here call me Professor Bob." The man smiled, revealing several missing teeth but also genuine warmth. "I know what you're thinking. What's a homeless man doing calling himself professor? But I got my reasons for that title." "I'd like to hear those reasons," Tupac said sincerely, sitting down on the concrete sidewalk beside Professor Bob. "And I'd like to hear why you chose those particular songs to play. They seem to mean something special to you." Professor Bob studied Tupac's face more carefully, and suddenly his expression changed to one of shocked recognition. His guitar pick slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the sidewalk. "Wait a minute." "Wait just a damn minute." Professor Bob's voice was barely above a whisper. "You're... Holy Lord, you're Tupac Shakur." Tupac nodded, putting a finger to his lips. "Let's keep that between us for now, Professor Bob. But yes, I am. And I need to tell you something. I've never heard anyone sing my music the way you just did." It was like hearing it for the first time. Professor Bob's hands started shaking, and tears began forming in his eyes. "Young man, your music literally saved my life. And I don't say that lightly or as a figure of speech. Your songs pulled me back from the edge when I had nothing left to live for. Tell me about that," Tupac said gently. "Help me understand." Professor Bob set down his guitar carefully, treating it with the reverence of someone who understood its value went far beyond money. "I was a music teacher for 23 years. Taught high school kids in West Oakland, many of them just like you were when you were growing up, angry, talented, looking for something to believe in, trying to find their voice in a world that seemed designed to silence them." Tupac felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You taught kids like me?" "I taught kids exactly like you. Kids who had been written off by the system, who came from broken homes and broken neighborhoods, who had every reason to give up on themselves and their futures. But music," Professor Bob's eyes lit up with remembered passion. "Music gave them a way to transform their pain into power, their anger into art. What happened to your job?" Professor Bob's expression darkened. "Budget cuts. The Oakland School District eliminated the music program in 1993, said arts education wasn't essential. 23 years of showing kids that their creativity mattered, gone just like that." The pain in his voice was immediate. "I tried to find other work. But who wants a 50-year-old music teacher when schools aren't hiring? I lost my apartment, then my car. Ended up sleeping in the school where I used to teach until security banned me. That must have been devastating. I found myself in a homeless shelter, surrounded by people dealing with addiction, thinking, this is how my story ends. All those years of inspiring kids, and I'm going to die as another statistic. But something changed? I was lying on that shelter cot, feeling worthless, when this kid next to me had a radio and Dear Mama came on. I listened to those lyrics about struggle and pain, about keeping going when everything seems hopeless, and I realized something profound. What's that? Just because the education system gave up on music doesn't mean music gave up on the people who need it. Just because I lost my classroom doesn't mean I stopped being a teacher. Tupac was completely absorbed in Professor Bob's story, feeling like he was learning something essential about his own music's purpose. That's when you decided to start playing on the streets? That's when I realized my mission had ended. It had just moved to a different venue. I took my old guitar, the one thing ID managed to hang on to through everything, and I came out here to the neighborhoods where I used to teach. Professor Bob gestured around the street they were sitting on. These are my students now. Not just the kids, but their parents, their grandparents, anyone who needs to be reminded that music can heal, that art can transform pain, that their stories matter. And my music specifically, why do you play Tupac songs? Professor Bob looked directly into Tupac's eyes with an intensity that made the younger man feel like he was being seen completely. Because your music does what I always tried to do in the classroom. It validates people's pain instead of dismissing it. It shows that struggle can be transformed into strength. It proves that poetry and politics can exist in the same space. That's when Professor Bob said something that would fundamentally change how Tupac understood his own artistry. Your song, Dear Mama, that's not just entertainment to these kids and their families. That's therapy. That's a way for them to process their own complicated relationships with their mothers and understand that love and resentment can exist simultaneously. That forgiveness is possible even in the midst of ongoing struggle. Tupac felt like he was being hit by lightning as Professor Bob continued. And when I sing it out here, I'm not just performing. I'm continuing the education I started in the classroom. I'm using your words to teach people that their experiences have value, that their pain is valid, that they can transform their darkest moments into something beautiful and meaningful. Tupac couldn't hold back his tears anymore. Here was a man who had lost everything, his career, his home, his financial security, but had found a way to use Tupac's music to continue his life's mission of reaching young people through art. Professor Bob, Tupac said, his voice thick with emotion, I need to ask you something. What's that, young brother? Would you teach me? Would you show me how to play Dear Mama the way you just played it? Professor Bob looked stunned. You want me to teach you your own song? I want you to teach me what you've learned about my music by living it, by using it to survive, by making it a tool for healing instead of just entertainment. What happened next became legendary among the small group of people who witnessed it. Tupac sat down on the sidewalk next to Professor Bob, and for the next hour, the homeless music teacher gave the world-famous rapper a guitar lesson. But it wasn't just about chord progressions and vocal techniques. It was about finding the deeper emotional truth in the music, about understanding how songs can become lifelines for people who have nothing else to hold on to. As Professor Bob taught Tupac his arrangement of Dear Mama, a small crowd gathered again. But this time, instead of just one homeless musician performing for passers-by, there were two voices blending together, the original artist and the man who had transformed that art into a tool for survival and community healing. When they finished playing, Tupac made a decision that would impact both their lives forever. Professor Bob, I want to offer you something. A job. Come on tour with me. Teach this arrangement to my band. Help me understand how to reach people the way you've been reaching them. Professor Bob stared in disbelief. You're serious? Dead serious. What you're doing is more important than anything I'm doing on stage. But Professor Bob surprised Tupac with his response. I appreciate that more than you know, young brother. But I can't leave. Why not? Because these kids here need this. They need to see that even when you lose everything, you can still create beauty. They need to see that music isn't just for concert halls. It can happen anywhere, for anyone who needs it. Professor Bob picked up his guitar. But I'll tell you what I will do. I'll keep playing your music out here, showing these kids that their stories matter. And maybe when you write new songs, you can remember what you learned today. What did I learn? That the most important audience for your music isn't the people who can afford concert tickets. It's the people who need your words to survive another day. Tupac spent 2 more hours with Professor Bob that day, learning guitar techniques and gaining a new understanding of his music's impact. When he left, he pressed enough cash into the older man's hands to get stable housing. But Professor Bob's influence went far beyond that encounter. In the following months, Tupac began writing songs more conscious of their healing power, more aware of how music could serve as therapy. He quietly started a foundation providing instruments to homeless shelters, inspired by Professor Bob's example. Most importantly, Tupac never forgot the lesson that the true measure of an artist's impact isn't record sales, but how effectively their art helps people transform pain into something meaningful. Years later, Professor Bob continued performing on Oakland streets. He eventually saved enough for an apartment but never stopped his sidewalk concerts. Local newspapers called him Oakland's street music professor, but he never forgot the young rapper who sat down to learn. The story of that November morning became legendary among Oakland residents. They talked about the day a world-famous rapper got a guitar lesson from a homeless man, and how both seemed transformed by the experience. Professor Bob still plays Tupac's music on Oakland streets, still teaching young people that struggles can become art, that pain can become power, and that music can survive and thrive anywhere. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that wisdom can come from unexpected places, and that sometimes the most important lessons happen not in classrooms, but on street corners.